My name is Julian Spector. I'm a senior reporter at Canary Media. We're canarymedia.com, nonprofit newsroom covering the transition to a cleaner, more sustainable world. And it's my great pleasure to spend my days chasing down climate solutions, technologies, businesses, policies that are, driving fossil fuels out of the economy and finding cleaner and more economical alternatives. And today in this panel, we're going to be focusing on the electric vehicle revolution specifically. And I find that in writing about this space, there's this constant push and pull between optimism and pessimism and sort of saving the world and then running into all sorts of really annoying practical headaches trying to get good technologies out into the world. So we're going to try to give you a sense of the potential out there and then the real obstacles we got to tackle to make it happen. Before we introduce the panelists, I'm curious for you all, so this is kind of a new event. How many of you, if you raise your hands, are coming at it from the climate tech space, working in a startup, working in the energy space? Could you show of hands? Want to see? Okay, and then who here's coming from more like the real estate, property industry and kind of getting new exposure to all this cool climate tech stuff? So that seems like 50-50, kind of evenly split, which I think is a great thing to do with a live event, is bring these different worlds together. So let's introduce the panelists. Each of you can, I'll say who you are, and then you can tell us where you're coming from and what you're doing to make the electric vehicle revolution come sooner. So let's start with Peter Gajdos, partner at Fifthwall. How are you doing today?
Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Peter. I'm co-leading the climate investing here at Fifthwall. I've been actually doing climate investing now for 17 years. Have been part of 11 IPOs in the process in deep technology. And specifically at Fifthwall, I'm responsible for investments in the energy side of the equation. So I've been leading some of the largest financing of the past few years, ascent elements in battery recycling, One, Loop, electric hydrogen, so some of the iconic companies that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars in the past couple of years.
Great. So then Adam Smolyar, Director of Innovation Initiatives and Technology Investments at UDR, an LP in Fifthwall. I want to tell us a bit about, what's your purview and how does it relate to electric vehicles?
Sure, thank you very much for having me here. I've been with UDR for about a year and a half. In my almost 30-year career, I've spent the last decade in real estate, major projects, transformational projects. EV charging certainly falls into that category. And very excited about not only leading some of the rollout and strategies behind the EV charging, but also figuring out ways on how do we future-proof our ability to deliver the services to the residents as the residents' needs keep changing.
Absolutely, and we'll be diving more into that. And then we have Deeana Ahmed, Chief Strategy Officer at One. Want to tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us here today. So I'm Deeana. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at One. We're an energy storage manufacturer that's headquartered in Michigan. So we're working to double the range of EVs, but also to bring domestic energy storage manufacturing to scale. We're going to be bringing an utility scale energy storage product to market beginning of next year. And so, working to accelerate the electrification of EVs, but also supporting the scale up of EV infrastructure. So I've been with the company for about 2.5 years and excited for this conversation.
That's awesome. And you definitely have the most colorful suit on stage, which I always like when there's some more colors. Sometimes the conference attire can be a little monotonous, so thank you for that. And then we have Frank Now, co-founder and COO of Loop. What are you doing there?
Well, I'm the co-founder and COO, so you nailed that part. I definitely feel like I should have worn a little more colorful suit, maybe gone with a bolo tie, but I'll let you guys achieve the pop for us up on stage today. So we are an EV charging solution provider. We are a leader in both convenience, affordability, and reliability within the space. We manufacture our own EV charging hardware, as well as our own software platform from the ground up. And some of the things that kind of have us stand out amongst the crowd is that we exclusively work with our partners in order to bring our solutions into our customers' buildings. And also, our software solution is one that is open and accessible. So we have our own open API that we built into that, which allows us to integrate into other solutions inside of the building environment, as well as other providers of property technology, such as One's battery systems. And we also are the leader in the space as far as affordability and accessibility. So we have a lot of chargers in distribution and a lot of easy access to get our equipment into the space.
Great. Okay. And for those of you standing in the back, there are some open seats in the front row. If you don't want to squeeze past anyone, feel free to come up and make yourself comfortable out there. So let's go back to Adam. So I think for folks who don't know, like UDR, you all oversee, it's more than 50,000 apartment buildings around the country, right?
Over 60,000 units.
60,000. Okay, so 60,000. So I don't want to reduce you to an avatar or a symbol or anything. You're a human being after all. But it seems to me that you could be the stand-in here for achieving electric vehicle charging adoption at scale. You know, if you can do it across 60,000 buildings across the country, probably we can make this happen on a nationwide scale. But if you're not able to do that, and if you're finding that the obstacles and the headwinds are too strong, then that probably means all the other major real estate owners out there are running into similar trouble. So can you tell us where are you at trying to get EV charging to your tenants? What's your goal for that, and what kind of trouble are you running into achieving that goal?
Sure. I think I'll start at the beginning when over a year ago, we started having a truly thoughtful, strategic conversation at UDR about how do we want to engage with EVs and providing the right capability to our residents. And we started doing exactly what we usually do at UDR, which is listening to the customer. So it was a very grounds-up approach. We surveyed all our residents. We wanted to find out what their needs are, what they anticipate their needs to be, how are they using EV charging, how do they envision using it in a multifamily environment, how satisfied they are with existing providers, and so on and so on. And then we did this. The second thing we did was to actually ask our staff, because they're at the forefront really of what's happening out there. Not only what do they hear, what the residents are having, and obviously how to best to support this important offering, but also what happens with the prospects. And to us, a lot of the business case for rolling out EV charging is really making sure that we remain competitive and have the right offering for the future EV owners as they're looking for that capability. And we found out a lot of interesting things, some predictable, some very specific. Among EV owners, 75% said it is very important for them that the property offered EV charging, for example. We also know that the properties that offer sufficient EV charging have about twice as many EV owners as those that don't. So we know it's a closed loop, self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you have, the more you will attract. And then we also know that they were definitely interested in having a lot more EV charging capability. So we started with that. We triangulated with the third-party data to figure out where we stand. And then what we're really finding is we have this roadmap with a multi-year phased approach, but it fundamentally in real estate, will be no surprise to anybody here, it is property by property specific strategy still. The nuances you find on the ground of how much electrical capacity there really is versus what we thought there was, what the slope was of the future handicapped parking spot is or isn't, you only find out that later. And those kind of details start actually impacting the details.
And is it utility by utility also in terms of interconnection and the price of power?
There's just absolutely the list of things we find. But that is what makes this, I think, our real estate world and certainly multifamily space very, very exciting, is because it is so complex. Because it would be really boring and easy if we just could roll out something with one magic wand.
Gotcha. So I guess to sum that all up in broad strokes, what are the biggest pain points you have to like a full nationwide rollout today? Like 2 or 3, key obstacles.
One is it is property by property and market by market. When we surveyed, I mentioned we surveyed, obviously, we have properties where we have absolutely no EV owners. We have properties where they're in the 20% of the ownership, right? Clearly it's not even just markets. Within the same market, depending on the kind of resident you have, what kind of community you have, you will have very distinct differences in what their expectations are on what kind of EV charging you would want to have there. So that's number one. The second thing is I think that also necessitated kind of not being dogmatic about, I know a lot of vendors would want us to say, well, 10%, 20% of your parking spaces or cross-portfolio should be EV charge. That's not real. There are places where it should be double that, and there are places where I think we can still wait a few years and see what happens, because that's not where EV ownership is taking off at the moment. So we want to have the optionality for the future, but we also kind of want to be fiduciary responsible now.
Right, that makes sense. So I guess what I'm hearing there is the friction of doing everything case by case makes it hard to do a kind of seamless nationwide rollout. Let's bring in our startup leaders here, because I'm curious, what do you see as the key impediments out there today, and how are you using new technology, new approaches to sort of break through those barriers to mass EV adoption? Deeana, do you want to take that one?
Well, as an energy storage manufacturer, we're working to domestically scale battery manufacturing for EVs. So I think that is number one. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, which creates these supply side incentives paired with demand side incentives, then we're stepping into the utility scale energy storage market. And I think it's really important to think about the infrastructure available to deploy charging at the capacities that's required to meet what users want. And I think in apartment buildings is a really important use case to look at when you think about the load required for DC fast charging for an urban setting where there is a high percentage of EV adoption and they're looking for that infrastructure. That delay with respect to being able to bring the infrastructure from the utility side is something that can be a barrier, and batteries are a really important support system in that framework. So we think that we can support on the supply side by scaling batteries, and we want to double the range of EVs and are bringing a product, Gemini, to market that can offer 600 miles of range on a single charge. And that's one part of the problem, but then the other part is having the infrastructure available, and with Aries Grid, this product that we're bringing to market or early next year, we want to be supporting the infrastructure side of charging to be able to allow for that availability to consumers, because it's not just urban settings, it's also rural settings. And to be distributable and to be distributed, to offer the same sort of convenience that gas stations offer for combustion engine vehicle owners, you need that sort of support to meet the timelines that we're on. Because it's, you also have the OEMs that have these timelines to transition their manufacturing to EVs, and so then the infrastructure has to meet that moment. So we're playing on both sides.
Yeah, and that's very cool. So I'm a battery storage nerd, so the use case you're saying is if the utility is going to have trouble sourcing enough power into the building where you're trying to put up a whole bunch of new chargers, you package a large battery in that garage somewhere, and then that's able to kind of deliver the power you need without drawing as much from the grid at any one time. So cool, that's a new technology to tackle the problem. And then Frank, what's your approach? Because you're on like the actual charging hardware, software side. Like what is the market not providing right now that you're aiming to provide?
Well, I think one of the first things that part of the reason that we actually started Loop was the affordability component. So a lot of the incumbents that we saw when we first started Loop were 3-4 times the cost of our equipment, right? You cannot ultimately meet 10, 20, 30% coverage in a garage in a commercial setting, sitting there paying $8,000+ per charging station, right? And we're not even talking about the labor, the other infrastructure required. So that's part one. The other part of that is also the reliability piece. There's a reason. Actually, we've been talking over the last week about doing some rip and replace work with UDR at their sites of old equipment, and not vastly old equipment that's within the last 5 years of implementation, but just simply is not meeting that reliability mark for the customer. And so bringing that reliability both on the hardware side of things, but also on the software and the network connectivity, right? It's a huge problem inside of many of these commercial settings, subterranean garages, bad internet service or connectivity. So bringing localized network through our unique software package that we have constructed. And then also integration, right? So integration goes further than just with the hardware, other infrastructure that's at the site, or new infrastructure technologies like battery systems, which are extremely important. Peak load shaving, demand charges, helping to reduce the utility expense that's ultimately going to skyrocket over the next few years, no matter how many power plants we build, with the amount of energy we're going to be consuming via the vehicles, but also integration into the building systems, right? So we built our software from the ground up, first 1 and 0, all our own code. And we created our own open API, so other software platforms can actually create API hooks and integration between our software and theirs. So whether that's a building management system, a battery management system, even unique commercial operator loyalty programs, whether you're talking about Marriott Bonvoys or you're talking about Chevron mile programs, whatever it may be, being able to create those integrations into these ecosystems and keeping their consumers, their customers, because it's UDR's resident, right? Not Loop's user driver, but keeping them inside of their ecosystem, while providing that reliability of the backbone of our software platform in order to ensure connectivity, access, transaction management, and then obviously provide that convenience for the building owner, where we come in with our partners. We ensure that we're thinking about the entire process of implementing the charging infrastructure holistically, and then ultimately how much of the process of managing and operating the charging network at the site do we need to perform for the building owner based on their needs. So a lot of it, leasing agents and property managers at the site are not wanting to interact with another system, right? And learn another thing and be responsible for another thing at the site. They've got enough to deal with tenants who are coming in and requesting help, or unfortunately sometimes complaining about things. The last thing you want is to have your system, Loop Charger, be that thing they're complaining about. So that focus on reliability, convenience, affordability, and then the partnership, right? Really actually coming in and working with the building owner operator, and understanding what their long-term, short-term goals are, and really trying to achieve a great game plan forward where we're all working together. I'm not just selling you something and walking away.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so make it cheaper, make it more reliable. In my reporting, certainly the just basic functionality of chargers is still a surprisingly big problem. You show up at the charger, it's just not working, and you can't get anyone on the phone, and that can't really happen anymore. That's not a recipe for a total transition to electric vehicles. So I wanted to bring Peter in. So you said you've been investing in this space for 18 years, going on 20 years. At the start of that, EVs were not dominating the auto industry. Now they are. Every major automaker's got a full lineup coming. You got an exponential growth in customers choosing EVs. I would say the charging space has a little more of a checkered kind of business history. We've had some companies go public, some charging networks and hardware providers, a lot of SPACs. I don't know, not necessarily great results out of that space. So as an investor, what do you see as kind of the missing pieces in this whole charging infrastructure world that's going to build the bridge between the built environment and electric vehicles?
So I think one piece that was already touched on is the scaling, right? I think charging was lagging behind what has happened in vehicles. You need to get to the proper scale, and that will drive cost pieces, other thing. The other thing that we see is people had point solutions, and they thought about their one or two pieces of the value chain. Where we're really focused on, especially in this phase of investing, is taking the full value chain. So I think about the design, I think about the manufacturing, I think about the contracting, I think about the installation, I think about the maintenance. I think that's the core because you need to look at the total cost of ownership. I think some of these companies have failed there and, cut out the contractors, cut out certain financing solutions, and they didn't provide the full value chain. And if you fail any of that piece, then you have service issues, then you have outage issues, then you have cost issues. So I think that's where we see opportunities, people really focusing on the integrated solution at this point. We're not at a phase where we're going into point solutions. At this point, we need to have an integrated solutions to make it work. So I think that's what, Tesla got it right. Mm-hmm. They offered an integrated solution from the very beginning, from the car all the way to the very end. So that experience is much more seamless than others. So I think replicating a Tesla-like strategy with others, because there cannot be just one monopoly. Maybe there will be for multifamily owners, for the gas station replacements, whatever that is. I think that's the critical piece that we're excited. And I think the final piece I'm going to mention there is we're underestimating the pace of technology. All these solutions that we're looking at have to be future-proof. Over-the-air updates, like some of the companies don't have over-the-air updates in 2023. Think about that. Like that's just unacceptable for chargers. So we are really looking at the next solutions, whether it's have the ability to integrate the next battery, the next software package, whatever that is, so that you can future-proof your building.
Yeah, I think that future-proofing question is worth dwelling on for a moment, because we're already seeing billions of dollars invested in this, often clunky, sometimes not great charging infrastructure, and it strikes me that we're very early in the adoption cycle here. It's not a mature kind of technological space. But if we're putting billions of dollars of today's chargers in, how do you know that those are going to be what you want to be charging with in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And what kind of strategies can you employ today to make sure you don't end up kind of regretting what you jumped into? Maybe, do you want to take that?
Sure. How do you know what will happen in 10 years? You don't. Right, but what do? You invest with fifthwall, and honestly, and that's what we're doing, right? You think about the future. You try to predict as much as you possibly can. You look at the roadmaps of where the battery, the storage space is going, which we're very excited about. It's a few years away for multifamily application, but that doesn't mean we don't want to keep our eye on it, and that's how we do it, is through this kinds of sort of investments. And in the meantime, we are very careful about not overbuilding. So we want to be very aggressive. We want to make sure that we meet the needs of our residents, current and in the coming years, not necessarily a 10-year horizon. But we also don't want to overbuild either, because I do think the future holds something very, very exciting, but none of us truly know what it is.
Mm-hmm. And maybe for Frank, on the hardware side, where do you see the trends going? Like, how will chargers in a few years look different from today's?
Well, I think for the purpose of future-proofing, I think, and this is a benefit of having an ex-Tesla employee leading our hardware design side of our company, is building that technology in and having the hardware be ahead of the software. So our hardware is a few steps ahead currently of even our software package, which I would say is probably one of the more advanced in the industry. Our new software that we're going to roll out over the air, like everything else that we roll out with our software side, will ultimately also create a localized instance of our entire software platform. So rather than having to reach into the cloud in order to perform a transaction, right? Imagine being able to have that transaction resolve itself locally at the site without any internet connection whatsoever for either the user or the devices. So right now we can perform offline transactions and then they post later, but this allows for what we are going to dub the Infinity Protocol for our company, and will ultimately create this unique software loop inside the building. And then on the hardware side, it is starting to be forward-thinking about vehicle to grid. So all of your ISO 115 or 15118, whatever number it is. But plug and charge, vehicle to grid, being able to feed back into energy storage systems. Again, that interoperability between the different building systems that exist at the site, whether you're saying, I want to get fed from the solar through the battery to the charger, or just from the charger to the battery, or charger to grid because the energy is cheap at that moment, or we're off peak, right? really creating that ability to participate in a software ecosystem with the hardware in an efficient way, and being flexible enough to do that, one way with UDR and a different way with Marriott and another way with Starwood. And, every building operator does things differently with different systems, and that ability to be able to adapt quickly in the moment and have the technology built in that allows you to do so.
Yeah, I think from our side, it's the ability to scale and drive products that are low cost enough to be able to be deployed in these use cases. And so, in order to future-proof the technology, being able to have the infrastructure set up such that you can handle the load that's coming in the next year is also really important. So from our side, we're building LFP, lithium iron phosphate, utility scale energy storage batteries. These are utilizing more abundant materials. They're also safer batteries. Being domestically manufactured helps to bring costs down because we can benefit from the production tax credits, and then we're able to deploy more locally and support kind of the scale of the overall charging infrastructure across the U.S. So I think that piece of the puzzle is what's going to help with that inflection point of scaling the deployment of charging infrastructure.
Gotcha. I guess speaking of emerging technologies for charging, I've covered a few companies in the wireless charging space, which sounds very futuristic, but it's actually like very real today, and it's kind of like the phone charging, but you have a thing on the ground and it beams it into a receiver in your car. Tesla just acquired a company that does that in Germany, so we don't know what they're going to do with it exactly. But do you see any room for that in kind of disrupting the plugs and cables and all this material stuff that we're so used to for charging?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that happening. I'd say it's still a few years away. If you go to high power, high voltage, there's some safety issues. Even if humans are not present, because it creates heat. For example, cats tend to sleep under those chargers and they get cancer rates. So there's things like that are physically available if you have it in homes.
You don't want to fry the kitten just to charge your car.
You fry it very slowly over time. But no, that's just an anecdote. But there's other solutions. There's even solutions that just directly through wherever the metal is. So there's a lot of creative solutions that are actually coming from Israeli defense systems for this. So I wouldn't discount it, but that's not the problem we have right now. We have very different problems right now. We need to get chargers in the ground. In 2028, we can talk about wireless charging in 2030. At this point, we need to get chargers in the ground.
Yeah. Well, to that point, what's the workforce dynamics here? Because it's certainly in the clean energy industry broadly, like there's not enough electricians in the country to do all the solar and home electrification work we need to meet our climate goals. How do you run into that trying to, install this stuff across a portfolio across the country? Like, is that a pain point at the moment? Just having enough skilled workers to do the work?
Yes, I think that's true. I think it's on the long list of different challenges. In addition to that, you have permitting and sort of local regulations. You have, it was mentioned, the subsidy side, for example, right? Which does influence prioritization of which properties we also go after, and the timing of them. So it becomes a very interesting sort of reprioritization, dynamic, agile reprioritization of projects. If we suddenly hear of a location where there's a new subsidy that comes along, might as well leverage that, of course. And then, but I do think the electrical capacity, the infrastructure, is much of a more profound challenge than the workforce. That's what we're finding.
Okay, so just getting the raw electricity out of the grid that you need and having a utility that can do the work for you.
Having enough already versus actually needing to have utility bring in additional, which then extends not just the cost but the timing of the project.
I think if you think, though, more broadly on workforce, so I'm on the Department of Energy's Workforce Advisory Board. And we're talking about this actively because you need a lot more skilled trade, broadly speaking, in manufacturing, in electrician supports for infrastructure deployment. So it's broadly speaking, it is a challenge. You're talking about millions of jobs by 2030 that we need to bring online. So there is a push to create a paradigm shift that these types of careers are valuable and there's opportunities and upward mobility and you can bring folks from high school or 2 years associates into these pipelines and give them opportunities upwards. And I think that is a challenge for the United States, broadly speaking, to realize this energy transition.
Mm-hmm. And that's been a fascinating part of this new surge in battery manufacturing in the US, which we didn't do very much of until this past year, but now all these jobs, pretty well-paying jobs, are located here, and so it's kind of sharing the benefits of the clean energy transition with more people living in America. So yeah, that's a trend to keep watching. So I guess, and we're coming into kind of the end, last few minutes here. So thinking ahead, what do you think is a realistic goal as far as mass EV charging adoption? Like, are we heading towards a future where every apartment building, just as a matter of course, is fully loaded with EV chargers? As a renter, that sounds great. I've never seen that, in existence. But like, what's the realistic endpoint that we're trying to build to here?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the future, to be honest. I think some presence for sure, but I think so much more is happening across our ecosystem, whether it's at the workplace, and you have the same kind of capabilities being built at the workplace, whether, I've just read that in Germany, they're going to be mandating that the gas stations will be offering EV charging. Well, imagine if we even started to pursue something like this as a strategy in this country, would dramatically change with the offering without changing the behaviors, right? Which is one of the challenges in overall EV adoption, is this idea of where am I going to do it? I'm used to going to the gas station. That's how I've been trained for generations. So suddenly actually going with the path of least resistance might very well help with the EV adoption. And then you have obviously level 3s and so on and so on, and the Tesla network opening up to all the other manufacturers. So I think the overall offering and capability is going to also play a huge role. So we don't see a hockey stick here. We really we see an uptick, and then I think it will level down on the multifamily demand side.
And that's a really good point. We shouldn't assume everyone needs to charge in their apartment building, because that's not where we get gasoline today, actually. Right. So it would be convenient if it was there. But anyone else on kind of the long-term goal?
Yeah, I agree, and I at the same time kind of disagree. I'm also a Tesla driver, right? So I was living in an apartment complex before I moved in with my wonderful partner in a condo building, but I had access to a charger in my building, and I cannot even begin to tell you the level of convenience and the way it changed my experience of owning a vehicle in general, to go to bed and wake up and have a fully charged car that can go 300 miles, right? And then rinse and repeat that process without having to ever go back to a gas station again. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm not exactly the biggest fan of going to gas stations. It's not the place I like to go hang out on, a Wednesday afternoon. So, being able to eliminate that requirement from my daily life, except for when I'm going to, try and go ski up at Mammoth or something, that's a pretty huge convenience factor. I also think that one thing that is changing right now, that obviously companies like UDR are dealing with, is in California this year, they just changed the electrical code. So now they're requiring 30% of every parking space to be fully electrified per code. And that's not just happening in California. That's happening in other states as well. And those kinds of code requirements are ultimately going to be the thing that dictates just how much we end up having. But I think that California is obviously a leader. He'll probably raise it up to a much higher percentage point, but I could see 20 to 30% of parking spaces in almost every commercial, residential building being a requirement in most states.
Gotcha.
here.
Well, I'll jump in there because we got to wrap up. So super quick lightning round. One of the long-term goals from the White House and other states is getting to all electric new vehicles by 2035. So there's one sentence each. How optimistic are you that we're on track to get to a point where all new vehicles can be electric and everyone can charge them by 2035?
It will not happen by 2035, but I firmly believe it will happen. Going from 400 miles, where Tesla is heading now, to 600 miles, changes the game for the auto, also stationary. If you suddenly can have battery for 2 days, game over.
Okay.
Can I just say yes to that?
That's great. That's a very succinct answer.
I agree with both points.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic, and I think it's partnerships that also is going to make that happen. So we can't do this in a vacuum. Battery manufacturing, charging manufacturing, and then deployment of technologies. We have to bring partners together in order to achieve that goal.
I think it's going to be a lot of hard work, but if we keep getting to, as Loop, get to work with companies like UDR and One and Fifthwall, I think that there's a really high probability that we can get there or get really close. And I think that real close would be a really great place to be at that point.
Awesome. Well, can we give a round of applause for these awesome panelists?